The quiet strength of Cora. There are some women whose stories don't begin with thunder. They begin quietly in small rooms in early mornings, in the soft spaces where a child learns to survive long before she learns to speak her truth. Cora's story begins in one of those quiet places. She came from Arkansas, a stretch of land where the sun rose early and the work rose even earlier. She was one of 12 children, near the oldest, which meant childhood didn't last long. Before she learned to braid her own hair, she was already braiding her sister's. Before she learned to spell her own name, she was rocking babies on her hip. She remembered walking miles to and from school, long dusty roads in extreme heat or vicious cold that bit at her fingers. But she also remembered the joyful winter snowball fights with her siblings, laughter echoing across the yard, and the small moments that made the hard days bearable. She had a string of brothers born right behind her, seemingly endless, one older sister, two older brothers, one of whom was tragically killed in an accident. So, when her first baby sister finally came after all those boys, she was overjoyed to welcome her. She was her mother's helper, her siblings' second mama, her father's first daughter, and for reasons no one ever explained, the one he seemed to resent the most. Some children grow up learning to read books. Cora grew up learning to read danger, the shift in her father's footsteps, the tightening in his jaw, the silence that meant stay out of the way. And still, she worked. Because in Arkansas, work wasn't a choice, it was survival. Cora chopped cotton until her hands blistered and her back screamed. Row after row, under a sun that didn't care who it burned. She learned to move fast, stay quiet, and endure pain without flinching. Cotton fields teach a child two things: how to bend and how to rise again. In those fields, Cora learned endurance. In that crowded house, she learned responsibility. Under her father's cold stare, she learned silence. And in the soft moments shaped by her mother's determination, she learned love, the kind that holds a family together even when everything else is falling apart. Life was hard, to say the least. But she stayed the course and rolled with the punches as she watched her mother endure unnecessary hardships under her father, the man who was supposed to care for and love his family, not destroy it at every angle. Her mother almost lost her life delivering her 12th and final child. Thank God the doctor got there in time to save her, but the child was lost. She had already lost her oldest son, Delancey, killed in a tragic car accident. It devastated her mother and the rest of the family. He was only 11 years of age. At some point, the family moved from Arkansas to El Centro, California, where the heat was so intense you could fry an egg on the ground. They moved a few more times before finally settling in Fresno, where Cora finished her education at Washington Union High School. Even though all the children believed their father was capable of more, he always found the hardest labor, cotton and grape fields, and put every one of them to work in it. Cora didn't remember him working alongside them much, but she did remember him collecting the money from their hard-earned labor. This is the story of a woman who carried more than she ever said out loud. A woman who learned to endure before she ever learned to dream. A woman who would one day walk away from everything that tried to break her, but not before surviving storms that leave marks no one else can see. This is Cora. And this is the beginning of her quiet, unshakable strength. Cora's quiet claim. Cora was a country girl with a soft voice and a hard life, the kind of girl who learned early that silence could be safer than speaking. Her father's anger lived in the walls of that house and in her soul. It sat at the dinner table. It followed her down hallways. It taught her to move quietly, breathe lightly, and never expect gentleness from him in particular. And long before she ever became a wife or a mother, she had already survived the kind of hurt no child should ever know. When she was still just a young teenage girl, her father beat her bare-breasted in front of her siblings, a humiliation so deep it carved itself into her memory. The blows were so violent that one of her nipples was beaten off, literally causing permanent damage. And when he finished, he told her, "Now, go show your mama what you made me do." It was a wound that helped shape her. A shame she never deserved. A pain she carried quietly into adulthood. Cora never spoke of it, but the memory lived beneath her silence, the reason she feared anger, The reason she moved softly, the reason she prayed her own children would never feel that kind of pain. It was the first storm she survived, but it would not be the last. She prayed all men weren't like him. So when she finally grew old enough to choose her own path, she didn't wait for anyone to ask. She asked Nate to marry her. She had met him in church. And who knows, maybe she thought a man who was religious would be a far better cry from the chaos she grew up in. Maybe she thought love could rewrite what pain had carved into her bones. Maybe she believed a new last name could undo a childhood full of fear. But it didn't. From early on, their marriage was a storm, loud, unpredictable, and always circling back around. Every argument sent her running to her mother's house, 5 children trailing behind her like little shadows. They would argue right there in front of her mother, voices raised, tempers flaring. Her mother would shake her head and say, "Hush, Cora. An empty wagon makes a lot of noise." And she meant every word. She'd seen enough foolishness to know noise didn't equal sense. Not wanting to offend him, out of his earshot, she'd tell Cora, "If you hush, he'll have no reason to argue. He'll be arguing with himself." And no fool does that. But he swore the mother-in-law was meddling. He blamed her for everything and resented that she was the safety net Cora ran to. One time, instead of running to her mama's house, she took her kids to a friend's home, and he was oh so surprised when he went looking and didn't find her where he expected. The truth was simple. Mother Pearl had nothing to do with their disagreements, their separations, or the tears Cora cried. She didn't meddle in anybody's business. She lived by many rules, one being, short visits make long friendships. Mother Pearl hardly ever stepped into anyone's house. Folks were welcome at hers, but she had plenty to do and wasn't into wasting time on unnecessary visiting. Still, he moved Cora 3 hours away, convinced distance would fix what he refused to face. It didn't. Running toward peace. The fighting followed them like a shadow. Sometimes Cora would gather all her children, pack whatever she could, and climb aboard a Greyhound bus back to Fresno. One time, when they arrived, Mother Pearl laughed until she nearly cried. Cora had layered 6 dresses on Tandy, and by the time they reached Fresno, that child was burning up. She probably did it to save room in the suitcases. Cora wasn't running away. She was running toward peace. But peace never stayed long. Her sister used to say they were the most mismatched couple she'd ever seen, next to our parents, she'd add. And she wasn't wrong. They fought, and between all that fighting, Auntie said, the children kept on coming. The man behind the mask. Even though Cora's husband wasn't an educated man, he somehow ended up with his own construction business in the mid-1960s. But being a business owner didn't stop him from being a dog. In their first house, he got a teenager across the street pregnant. That child was born between their 6th and 7th baby. He sometime became strange about providing for the family. Cora wondered why he often came home not hungry. Her neighbor, who sometimes worked with him, told her he'd sometimes stop at the cafe down the street to eat before coming home. That explained that. One time, there was money left over from school pictures. Cora used it to help buy food to feed her family. He had the audacity to ask where his change was. She shouted, "You are eating it, you fool." And one of the many times they fought, with all her might she took those long, hard fingernails and scratched some of the black off of him. Tandy remembers the good times, like looking out the window to see the milkman take empty glass bottles off the porch and replace them with filled bottles of fresh milk. She remembers the extremely fun trick or treat nights when they had a large basket full of delicious candy. She remembers playing with neighbors, next door, across, and down the street. There was always something to do and always a way to play. Those younger days were full of joy. Life on First Street. By the fall of 1968, whether because of the neighbor's pregnancy or something else entirely, they moved from 23rd Street to First Street. The house was the same 2-bedroom structure, but it had a big backyard. In that new house, Tandy remembers a rifle in the closet, just lying there. She wasn't terrified, just confused why they even needed it. They were told not to touch it, but she peeked at it from time to time. The neighbors next door, down and across the street were friendly, and the family fit right in. One of the greatest joys was the little candy store down the block. The kind you could reach without crossing a single busy street. Back then, a quarter stretched far, chips, candy, sunflower seeds, the works. To a child, it was heaven, going to the store with even a nickel and coming back home with some goodies. Their new school, Lincoln Elementary, was only a few walking blocks away, and those days were some of the best. The teachers were African American, looked just like the children they taught, and carried themselves with pride and warmth. For the most part, everyone behaved, everyone got along, and the school felt safe. There was a park nearby, but the real fun was in their own backyard. They grabbed some of their dad's old construction materials and turned them into makeshift seesaws, laughing, balancing, as if they had the best playground in the world. They played jump rope, jacks, and hopscotch in front of their house, on the sidewalk, and made games out of whatever they had. It was a simple time, a joyful time, and for Tandy, it was pure fun. One of the best memories was when he took the 4 oldest children out and each came back with a bike. Even though she had to start with training wheels, she got a kick out of riding her sister's regular bike, falling over and over until she learned to ride it, and finally took the training wheels off of her own. She remembers her one and only birthday party, coming home from school to find her mother had baked a cake especially for her. They had a clothesline out back to hang laundry in that 2-bedroom house, and the backyard was their safe haven from the world. Summers, swimming, and cold Richmond. In the summer, the older children took swimming lessons. Tandy always thought it was Aunt Jerry's idea, but years later, her mom told her it was simply to get them out of the house and give her a break. With only one vehicle, Cora woke them early to walk to the Richmond plunge for lessons. After getting out of that pool, they had to walk home in the cold. Richmond's summers weren't like Fresno summers. They were cold, windy, and unforgiving. One day, Uncle Bobby picked them up. Walking to the plunge was fine. Walking back was torture. When that black Chevy pickup pulled up, it was a sight for sore eyes. They piled in shivering but grateful. Another summer afternoon, Uncle Bobby came over with that same black Chevy. He was the funniest uncle ever. One hot day, he gave the kids a ride to the store. When they returned, one of the kids grabbed his keys and tossed them back and forth so he couldn't leave. Neighbors sat on their porches laughing hysterically. It went on for what felt like forever, and the more he tried to get those keys, the more determined they were to make him stay. It was a good day. Uncle Bobby finally said, "I don't need those keys," started the truck without them, and drove off, only to circle back minutes later. The kids tossed the keys a little longer before giving them back. They loved him dearly and was glad to have him as uncle. The 7th child. By the time Cora was ready to have her 7th child, summer was ending and the school year was just around the corner. For reasons she never fully explained, Cora had a deep urge to have all her children born in Fresno, since her first babies had come into the world there. So back and forth to Fresno they traveled, hoping the baby would arrive before school started. But the baby didn't come in time. The older 4 children had to return home for school while their mother stayed behind in Fresno to deliver her 7th child. And during that time, the world outside was uneasy, the era when the Zodiac Killer was active. Bar nights. While Cora was away, her husband's worst habits rose to the surface. He had a strong desire for liquor, not just the drink, but the whole bar atmosphere. And because the Zodiac Killer was terrorizing California, he refused to leave the children at home alone. So, on more than one occasion, he shook the children awake in the middle of their sleep, told them to get dressed, and took them with him to the bar. Maybe he thought the Zodiac would get them if he left them behind. Maybe he just didn't want the responsibility of coming home and finding them victims. Maybe it was both. Before he drank, he always bought them a meal, hamburgers, fries, and a drink while they sat in a booth and ate, not really hungry at that time of morning, and he sat at the bar enjoying his liquor. Then, once he'd had enough to drink, they climbed back into the truck, drove home, slept a few hours, and woke up for school like nothing happened. He couldn't wait for Cora to return. Not because he missed her, but because he didn't want to drag the children with him to his favorite spot. Cora had the baby, came home, and slipped right back into her mother duties, carrying the weight of a household that never stopped needing her. A house too small. The house on First Street was already small when they first moved in, and with the arrival of another child, it grew even smaller. It was only a two-bedroom house with 7 children and 2 adults, every corner filled, every space spoken for. So together they went looking for another place, somewhere close but bigger. They found another two-bedroom house about 10 blocks away. But Cora had her eye on the house across the street, the one with 4.5 bedrooms, real space for a growing family. And that's the house they moved into next, in 1970, after spending 2 crowded years on First Street. The move to 11th Street. The house on 11th Street felt like a blessing at first. Bigger rooms, more space, a little breathing room for a woman who had spent her whole life squeezed between responsibility and survival. To the children, it felt like a joyous occasion. A new street. A bigger house. A fresh start. We quickly made friends with kids directly across the street, next door, and with a few further down the block. The candy store was perfectly placed right around the corner, just a few minutes away, and we didn't have to cross any major traffic streets to get there. The only annoying thing about that store was the lady who owned it. She asked a lot of nosy questions, the kind that, as a child, you felt obligated to answer. But choosing between answering her questions or getting the candy always won. Every time. They didn't know the truth of what their parents were carrying. They didn't know the cracks in the marriage were widening. They didn't know Cora was saddled with years of exhaustion. They were just children, excited to run through new hallways and explore a new neighborhood. But behind the walls of that house, the storm followed them. New school, new friends, new fights. Moving to 11th Street meant starting over again. New routines, new schools, new faces. Tandy immediately found a best friend on that street, but the two girls attended different schools. She never understood why she couldn't go to the closer school, the one her friend walked to every morning. Inside the house. The house was bigger than anything they'd ever lived in. A parent's bedroom downstairs. A living room. A dining room. A kitchen with a little breakfast room attached. A 2-car garage and a backyard big enough to add a small house if someone wanted to. Upstairs had its own bathroom, and for the first time, Tandy had her own room, with 2 attics attached that could store even more things, even though she didn't have much at the time. For a while, Uncle Bobby, his new wife, and their 2 young daughters moved into their house on First Street. Eventually, they moved into an apartment unit right around the corner, which was a bonus, because Uncle Bobby was still the fun uncle. Cora finally had more room to move around, and a lot more space in the kitchen to cook for her large family. Everything seemed to be going well. We got into our books, into the groove of the new neighborhood, the new school, and the church that was close enough to walk to. Even if Cora didn't attend the service every Sunday, she made sure her kids did. She got up early, got them ready, and made them walk to and from service. Her mother had instilled God in her, and she made sure she did the same with her children. Going to church without parents was fun sometimes, but there were older ladies in mother roles whether they were a mother or not, and they made sure we didn't act up. And if we did, we didn't get away with it. They corrected us on the spot. I still remember Sister Scott, an older lady who didn't have to say a word. Every time I thought I'd get away with putting my feet on the back of the pew where she sat, she'd just turn around and give me that stern look. Feet went down immediately. She didn't have to say a word. The happiest part of church for a child was Bible class. The sermon took too long, and because we didn't understand a thing the preacher was talking about, we couldn't wait for him to finish, so we could joyfully walk back home, eat, and play for the rest of the day before the grind of school the next morning. Thanksgiving and Christmas felt different around that big dining room table in that big house. From a child's point of view, everything seemed to be going well. But the marriage was crumbling. And on top of everything, Cora got pregnant with her last child, number 8. She had walked into the marriage with 1 child already, and her husband carried a deep hostility toward that child, a hostility he never showed toward his firstborn with Cora. Moments of light in a heavy house. Even in the middle of chaos, children find joy. One time, just for fun, the kids pushed the white truck further up the long driveway. When he came home, he demanded to know where Cora had gone. She told him she hadn't gone anywhere, which was true. The kids had simply gotten bored and pushed the truck. Tandy didn't understand the tension. She didn't understand the fear. She just knew they were playing. Children see pieces. They don't see the whole picture. Cora's mother-in-law had once lived with her parents in Fresno, before Tandy was born and before they moved to Richmond. For reasons Cora never fully explained, the woman rubbed her the wrong way. She never wanted to live with her again. As Tandy understood it, the paternal grandmother would be moving in with them at some point that year. Cora always felt her husband was a mama's boy and that he loved his mother so much he put her before his wife. She was not happy about it. And, honestly, the very thought of her mother-in-law moving in got Cora thinking about leaving for good this time. She was tired. She had had her share of fights with Nate. And this was the final straw she needed to make her move. The beating that changed everything. The house on 11th Street was supposed to be a fresh start, more rooms, more space, more hope. But a bigger house can't fix a broken man, and it can't quiet the storms he carries inside him. By then, Cora had 7 children in her care, 6 she had birthed with him, and 1 she had brought into the marriage. And that oldest child, the one she brought into the relationship, was the one he resented the most. The one he treated differently. The one he refused to love. And then came the day everything changed. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something that could be explained away. It was a beating, vicious, deliberate, and unforgivable. He laid hands on that child with a rage that didn't belong in any home, let alone one filled with children. And when it was over, when the dust settled and the tears dried, something inside Cora broke in a way that would never heal the same again. A mother can endure a lot. She can swallow pain. She can survive storms. She can bend until she's nearly split in two. But when someone harms her child, that's where she draws the line. That's the moment the quiet strength inside her stops whispering and starts rising. Cora didn't scream. She didn't fight him back. She didn't throw dishes or slam doors. She did something far more powerful. She protected her child. She sent her daughter to Pomona to stay with her brother, putting distance between the child and the man who had hurt her. She didn't care what excuses he made. She didn't care what story he told. She didn't care about his pride, his temper, or his accusations. Her child's safety came first. And from then on, Cora began planning her escape, quietly, carefully, the way a woman does when she knows she's dealing with a man who cannot be trusted. She didn't announce it. She didn't warn him. She just began doing some deep thinking. The decision had been made. The beating awakened something in her. A resolve. A fire. A line drawn in the sand. It probably gave her flashbacks to the unforgettable beatings she had endured from her own father. She would not let him destroy her children. She would not let him destroy her. She would not stay in a house where fear lived louder than love. This was the moment Cora stopped surviving for him and started surviving for herself. This was the moment the quiet strength inside her began to roar. The escape plan. The beating changed everything, not just for the child who endured it, but for Cora. Something inside her shifted. Something that had been quiet for years finally stood up. She didn't announce her decision. She didn't threaten him. She didn't even let her voice tremble. She simply began to plan. Cora had learned early in life that survival wasn't loud. Survival was quiet, calculated, patient. A woman like her didn't run blindly, she moved with purpose. And so, she began to move. Step 1. Protect the child. She protected her child the only way she knew how, by putting distance between her daughter and the man who had hurt her. That was the first step. The most important step. The step that told Cora she could do this. Step 2. Gather strength quietly. Cora didn't have money saved. She didn't have a car of her own. She didn't have a support system nearby, except Mother Pearl, 3 hours away, always ready to help in every way she could. Pearlie Mae wasn't the meddling type, but she had always been the supportive type. But Cora had something stronger than all of that. Resolve. She started paying attention to what she would need to leave. What she could carry. What she could hide. What she could take without him noticing. She folded clothes differently. She tucked away small items. She watched him, his moods, his habits, his drinking patterns, the way she once watched her father. She learned when he was least alert, when he was most distracted, when the house was safest to move in. She didn't tell the children what she was doing. Children talk. Children slip. Children don't understand the danger of a man who feels control slipping through his fingers. So, she kept it all inside. Step 3. Wait for the right moment. Cora knew she couldn't leave in the middle of a storm. She had to wait for a moment when he was gone long enough, or drunk enough, or distracted enough for her to gather the children and go. So, she waited for him to leave. Quiet strength is not passive. Quiet strength is strategic. And Cora was strategizing for her life. Step 4. The call that opened the door. When school let out, he left town, probably to pick up his mother, the same woman Cora had no intention of ever living with again. With him out of town, she could finally breathe. The moment he drove away, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. She called her brother. Maybe they had already talked. Maybe she had already hinted. Maybe he already knew she was reaching her breaking point. He came. They packed as much as they could fit into his car, the trunk, and the trailer he hitched to the back, clothes, a few pieces of furniture, the essentials for 7 children and a woman who had carried too much for too long. This time wasn't like all the other times she left. This time she wasn't running to cool off. She wasn't leaving to make a point. She wasn't leaving to scare him. This time, she was leaving for good. After they loaded the car and the rented trailer, the children climbed in and they left. Cora walked out of that house with her head high, her back straight, and her heart steady. She didn't look back. The road to freedom. They drove to Fresno first, to Grandma Pearl's house. A place where the air felt lighter. Where the walls didn't hold anger. Where the children could breathe. And where Cora didn't have to tiptoe around abuse and rage. They stayed a few days. Rested. Regrouped. Then they moved on to Pomona, where Cora would begin the next chapter of her life, a chapter she had earned through every tear, every prayer, every quiet moment of strength she had carried since childhood. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she would provide. She didn't know how she would rebuild. But she knew one thing. She was done. Done with fear. Done with violence. Done with a man who mistook her grace for weakness. This was the escape that saved her life and the lives of her children. This was the moment Cora claimed her freedom. The move to Pomona. Leaving 11th Street wasn't just a move, it was an exodus. A quiet, determined walk out of a life that had taken more from Cora than it ever gave back. After the beating, after the planning, after the long nights of whispering prayers into her pillow, Cora finally stepped into the unknown with her children at her side. A city far enough away to feel like a new world, yet close enough to family that she wouldn't be alone. She had 2 brothers in the Pomona area, one older, one younger. Pomona, a temporary landing. In Pomona, they lived temporarily with her younger brother, his wife, and their 2 kids in a small 2- or 3-bedroom house. Eventually, they found their own place in an area known then as Sin City. Pomona wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't a fairy tale escape. It was survival, but survival on her own terms. It might not have been ideal, but it was their own space. No shouting. No fists. No fear walking the hallways at night. Just Cora and her children, trying to build something steady out of the pieces they had left. The children adjusted in their own ways, some quickly, some slowly. But even in the uncertainty, there was relief. There was possibility. There was the quiet truth that life didn't have to be lived under the shadow of a man's temper. Cora's quiet strength in a new city. In Pomona, Cora tried to settle in, but the smog and the heat were too much, especially while she was pregnant. Maybe it was the baby she was carrying. Maybe it was her own body refusing to adjust. But after a month or 2, she knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't handle the heat. It felt harsher than anything she'd known in Fresno, and the smog only made it worse. So, she made another decision. Some of the children rode with her and her younger brother in his small car. The others were put on the Greyhound. They headed back to Fresno, back to the only place that had ever felt like a landing spot. back into the home of her dear mother, a woman she hadn't lived with in over a decade, and certainly not with all those children in tow. Her mother's house was already full, 3 adults, 3 children, every room taken. A 3-bedroom home bursting at the seams. But they made the best of it. The grape fields. Just before school started, the older children were sent out to the grape fields, huge vineyards stretching for miles, to earn money for their own school clothes. It was work they weren't used to, work that shocked their hands and stiffened their backs, work done under a heat that felt nothing like the city. They counted the minutes until lunch, when they could steal a little rest from the hard labor and the blazing sun, scrambling to find even the smallest patch of shade to enjoy a quick, tasty bite. They used to come up during the summers, and when their grandmother wasn't home, they'd head straight to the grape fields to greet her. Back then, the grapes were fun, you could eat as many as you wanted, and it felt like a treat. But working the fields was a whole different story. There was no fun in it at all. So when the day finally ended, they were more than ready. They packed up, filed into their grandmother's car, and rode home with the kind of relief that settles deep in your bones, grateful for the day to be over and for the chance to rest. Grandma Pearl could see it on their faces how much they hated being out there. She was a hard-working woman, and she looked at them and said, "If you don't want to be out here in this dirt, get your education." That statement hit home. Between each grape they cut from the vine, dropped into the pan, and spread across the brown paper trays, they learned what hard labor really was. The first day of school. On the first day of class, they were ready to step into a new year with the excitement that only the first day of school could bring. The morning held that old-fashioned kind of magic, the kind they remembered from earlier days, when new shoes squeaked, lunchboxes snapped shut, and the whole world felt wide open. The air was cool, the sun soft, and everything carried the clean, hopeful smell of fresh starts. And, because the school sat far out in the country, they also had the little adventure of catching the big yellow bus, that long rumbling ride that felt like its own world. The gravel roads, the open fields, the slow turns, the laughter drifting from seat to seat, it all added to the magic of the morning. They walked out the door with a quiet pride, carrying not just notebooks and pencils, but the same determination that had carried them through so much already. It felt like stepping back into a familiar rhythm, one filled with hope, promise, and the gentle echo of all the first days that came before. They walked into that school proudly wearing the clothes they had purchased themselves. It was theirs, and that mattered. Orange Center School. Orange Center Elementary was nothing like the schools they'd known before. It sat out in the country, fields stretching for miles, dusty roads, the smell of grapes in the air. It was too far to walk, so every morning a big yellow school bus pulled up right in front of Grandma's house. And if you caught the early bus, you got breakfast. Not just any breakfast, a big country-style spread, the best Pop-Tarts in town, a lineup of various cereals, boiled eggs, and other goodies that tasted like heaven compared to the boring breakfast at home. Tandy made sure she caught that early bus every single morning. The school was large and included preschool, elementary, and middle school. It felt familiar, full of children who looked just like them. After everything they'd been through, it felt like a soft landing. Orange Center had its own rhythm, strict but kind teachers, steady classrooms, a playground where children could breathe and be children. There was daily required exercise, something they definitely weren't used to in the city. And a principal who still believed in corporal punishment when he felt it was necessary. Mr. Nagel. Tandy never forgot him, or that long paddle he kept in his office. For the first time in a long time, life felt normal. They made friends quickly with kids from the country, kids who understood what it meant to work before the sun came up. Bus rides were fun and noisy, filled with laughter, teasing, and the kind of childhood moments that stay with you. At recess, they played tetherball, ran races, played kickball, and dodgeball. Inside the classrooms, they learned with focus as the teachers poured into them. They weren't just students, they were children rebuilding their sense of safety one school day at a time. And through it all, Cora held steady. She was back in Fresno, back near her mother, back in a place where she could breathe again. The house was crowded, The days were long, and the future was still uncertain, but her children were in school, safe, fed, and surrounded by familiar faces. And she patiently waited to give birth to her final child. For a woman who had carried storms her whole life, that alone felt like a small miracle. Orange Center became a chapter of calm, a pause between battles, a season of catching breath before the next move life demanded. Church required. Church to Tandy was very boring, and she hated going. It wasn't exciting to sit in the church house and listen to a sermon she didn't understand. On more than a few occasions, she pretended to have lost her shoe right before her mother packed everyone else in the car. Her mother wasn't delaying church over a shoe Tandy hadn't lost, so Tandy got left, just the way she planned it. Her grandmother must have picked up on it, because one day she sermonized. Even if you don't understand what the preacher is saying right now, stay with God. Go, sing, and enjoy the songs about the Father. Your understanding of Him will catch up in time. Tandy appreciated her sharing her wisdom, but she was still glad she had escaped another utterly boring sermon. Life at Grandma's house. I think my mother learned rather quickly that you cannot set up a household in an already existing household. It just does not work. My Aunt Jerry used to say all the mothers need room to spread their wings. And again, she was absolutely correct. My Aunt Jerry was full of both logic and wisdom. After she had the baby, my mother eventually grew tired of hearing my grandmother tell her friends, right in front of her, "I'm so glad I didn't put up my curtains yet because of Cora and all those kids." She had heard it one time too many. My grandmother had already helped her buy her car, a humongous station wagon big enough to fit everybody. Cora was utterly proud of getting her very first car on her own, without her husband. So she went out and found an apartment on the other side of town. Tandy was crushed. The new school was in the city, far from Grandma's house, which meant she'd have to switch schools in the middle of the year. She was going to miss the old school with the yellow bus and the best breakfast in town. But we moved into our 4-bedroom apartment anyway, and once my mother and grandmother weren't under the same roof anymore, they rekindled their bond, all that tension finally gone. New neighborhood, Kirk Elementary, and the Sugar Bowls. Settling into our new apartment was interesting. My mother had her own room, and I no longer had the luxury of my own space, but that didn't matter much. Everyone was tucked wherever they fit. The neighborhood seemed normal enough. I didn't know we were low income. Children rarely do. When you're little, as long as you have the basics, life feels fine. Our direct neighbors were a Mexican family who spoke very little English, but we managed to get along. One of the little boys used to say, open the water," instead of turn on the water, and it tickled me every time. Kids find joy in the smallest things. Kirk Elementary was a good school, mostly African American, full of energy and pride. I had an African American male teacher, Mr. Hamilton, who drilled education into our heads with a firmness that somehow still felt kind. He even took us to the TV room to watch The Electric Company a few times a week, which I absolutely loved. A recess highlight at Kirk was watching the sport hockey being played. It seemed like the whole school gathered to watch the two players hawk it out. And no matter how cold it was, we had to do exercises each and every day. We really stayed in shape back then because of it. I don't remember being required to do that kind of physical activity when we were in Richmond. For the most part, we got along with everyone. But there was one family, a large one, 8 or 9 kids not counting their mother, who, for reasons I still don't understand, developed a hostility toward us. In the neighborhood, they were known as the Sugar Bowl Gang. A few times, when my older sister stood outside with her boyfriend at night, they attacked her. My mother called the police over and over, but nothing ever came of it. One officer even warned her that this was a family she didn't want to mess with. Their father was in jail and had a terrible reputation. I never understood why they targeted my sister, or why she was always the only one outside when it happened, her boyfriend hovering over her trying to protect her. Back at school, life kept moving. We had an African American day where everyone wore dashikis, and my mother, the seamstress she was, made me a beautiful one. I wore it proudly on Black History Day. There was also a school carnival with a cakewalk, and if you won, you walked away with a whole cake. It was one of the happy days I remember. My mother bought a piano, and the four oldest kids had lessons right at home. The teacher came by every Saturday morning. It was interesting learning how to play simple songs like Mary Had a Little Lamb and Lean on Me. I don't know who made the phone contact, but someone called my father in Richmond. And it was decided that my dad's oldest daughter and oldest son would go there during the 2-week Christmas vacation. A visit and a little holiday shopping. We all tried to put in our requests for the gifts we wanted, and when he brought everything back right before Christmas, some of us actually got what we asked for. I was especially thrilled with my popcorn maker. I gathered a few close friends in my class, and it was interesting having my first crush on a cute light-skinned boy named Troy who did not notice me at all, but actually liked my friend named Galen. I still thought he was cute though. Mr. Hamilton's class was a combination of 4th and 5th graders, and when he didn't work us too hard, we actually had pockets of fun. Because we got free playtime with the creative blocks at the end of our studies, most of us rushed through our lessons just so we could play. My mother was especially happy that her very best friend lived right around the corner from us. I don't know if that was a little too close, but they had been friends for quite a while, the kind of close where, when my mother first brought her to meet my grandmother and aunts and uncles, everyone loved and embraced her instantly. She became family too. Her name was Mrs. Maxey, and I was actually in the same class with one of her sons at Kirk Elementary. He had a little crush on me, but I wasn't interested. He was friends with that cute boy named Troy, the one I had a crush on. One day after school, instead of going straight home as I was literally instructed to do by my mother, I decided to go home with my friend Nora. From there, her grandmother treated us to a trip to a hot dog stand, and they bought me the best hot dog I had ever tasted at that time. After spending a few more moments with them, I finally went home. My mother wasn't there yet, but when she did come in, I got what felt like the beating of a lifetime for my disobedience, for not coming straight home. I took my whipping, dried my tears, and then enjoyed my hot dog all to myself, mind you. When school let out, I attended a joyous summer school, until another sugar bowl fight broke out. This time, they were at our front door, attacking again. My mother had had enough. All I remember is her hollering, "Move," and then throwing acid out the window. That night, someone from the sugar bowl family called the police, claiming the acid had gotten into one of the boys' eyes. All I remember is the sound, a loud, indistinguishable holler when it hit. Someone finally went to jail that night, and our life was thrown into an uproar. My mother's cousin and his wife came to get me and my little sister, and everyone else went to my grandmother's house. The apartment had to be packed up and stored in my grandmother's garage. Thank God she had a big one, and we waited. A few days later, my little sister and I rejoined the rest of our siblings at my grandmother's house. Everything felt up in the air. We had never been without our mother. Life in that neighborhood had been a mix of joy, fear, and survival. Kirk Elementary gave us structure. The sugar bowls gave us chaos. And my mother gave us protection. It was also the first time I realized that sometimes, even adults are afraid. Life after the sugar bowls. After the fight with the sugar bowls, everything changed in a single night. My mother went to jail, and we ended up right back at my grandmother's house, the only place we had to land when life fell apart. Before the summer was over, my father found out what had happened. He came to Fresno, gathered all of us up, and took us back to Richmond. It was sudden, confusing, and chaotic, one of those moments where children just follow the adults because there's nothing else to do. But once we were back in Richmond, the atmosphere shifted. My father became hostile toward the older sister again. He literally started on his stepdaughter for what seemed like didn't amount to a hill of beans in ways that made the house feel uncomfortable. My mother wasn't there to protect her, and the disdain he had towards her was obvious. His temper, his moods, his hostility, all of it pressed down. My paternal grandmother was there, but she minded her own and did not interfere with the way her son did things. I'm pretty sure she saw what he was doing. My mother eventually received a weekend pass, a small taste of freedom, and when she discovered we were in Richmond, she didn't hesitate. She came straight there, packed us up, and brought us right back to Fresno. Then she returned to jail to finish her sentence. It was stressful beyond words. We were being shuffled between cities, adults, and court decisions, and we were just trying to keep up. But that Christmas, That Christmas was brilliant. My father came up and took my two older sisters Christmas shopping, and presents were everywhere in my grandmother's house. For a moment, joy pushed its way through all the chaos. Not long after, my mother received what she thought was another weekend visit, but the judge must have commuted her sentence. Instead of sending her back, he told her to go home. And just like that, we were together again. Life in the crowded house. But home was still my grandmother's crowded three-bedroom house. My grandmother, her mean-spirited husband, one aunt, three cousins, my mother, and her 8 children all squeezed under one roof. It was cramped, loud, stressful, and overflowing with personalities and problems. Life slipped back into normal, or as normal as it could be in a house that full. But the tension was thick. My grandmother's husband told my mother she was welcome, but said nothing about her 8 children. That statement told us exactly how he felt. Eventually, the tension grew so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. We slipped out and started sleeping at my aunt's one-bedroom apartment with her 3 kids, all of us stacked on top of each other like a deck of cards. But that didn't last long either. Thank God she had a big station wagon, because before long my mother, with 7 of her 8 children, was sleeping in that car. Food wasn't the issue. We ate. But nighttime was a different story. My mother would find a spot she believed was safe, park the car, and pray over us. And thank God we were all small then, because we laid those seats back and folded ourselves into whatever space we could find, drifting off to sleep under the weight of exhaustion and uncertainty. At dawn, she'd drive us back to my grandmother's house, and we'd climb onto the big yellow bus like everything was normal. We went to school clean, quiet, and pretending. And every afternoon, she'd be right there waiting, and we'd repeat our car sleeping routine all over again. Sometimes, especially on the weekends, she'd scrape together enough money for a hotel room. And stepping into that room felt like heaven. For walls, a door that locked, a little breathing room, it was luxury compared to the crowded car. For one night, we could stretch out, exhale, and remember what comfort felt like. It was survival, plain and simple. My mother reached her breaking point. The Easter decision. When Easter came, we went to Richmond for the week-long holiday. Somewhere during that visit, my parents must have kissed and made up, because suddenly it was decided. We were moving back. Instead of finishing the school year at Orange Center Elementary, the country school Tandy loved, we packed up again and returned to Richmond for the last 3 weeks of school. We finished the year at the same school we had first attended when we moved to 11th Street. It was dizzy, confusing, and exhausting. But that was our life. Tandy developed a pure hatred for moving. It was exhausting hauling boxes to and from, and adults always seemed to have free labor in children, the delegators of every command. A hectic summer. When we first arrived, things were happy again, but that happiness didn't last long. I think it was just like my aunt said, they were too mismatched to ever make it work. He slipped right back into his old ways, and my mother started plotting her next escape. There were days that summer when we were literally starving, even though he was still working. Hunger is not a good feeling. Not eating when it was clear he could afford groceries was brutal and deeply disappointing. He fought with Cora so much that she moved completely out of their bedroom and upstairs. He let his temper run the entire house. My mother had seen enough. She wasn't going to stand by yet again for his nonsense. So, she made another decision. San Jose, a new beginning. At the end of summer, right as fall approached, we moved again, this time to San Jose, California. We squeezed into my aunt's one-bedroom house with her 3 children. 11 people in one bedroom. But it was temporary. A few weeks later, we found our own place, a 4-bedroom house instead of an apartment. School across town. For reasons I still don't understand, we didn't attend the school in our own neighborhood. Instead, I caught a bus across town to a dominantly Mexican school. We were called the N-word there, but aside from that, the school was wonderful to me. I went on 15 field trips that year, and I was in heaven. We experienced so many wonderful places I was totally beside myself. I remember only a few field trips per year at other schools, nowhere near 15 I had experienced at Miller Elementary, and they were all delightful. My teacher was wonderful, and most of the students in my class were delightful as well. Mostly everyone in class had a special best friend. The class was a 5th and 6th grade combination. I was in my final year of elementary, and my best friend Terry was in the 5th grade, but that didn't stop us from being inseparable. The school year was brilliant. My mother seemed happy. Looking back, we were dirt poor, but being dirt poor isn't so bad when you have a roof over your head, food in your stomach, and clothes on your back, even if they aren't the latest style. She still had her station wagon, and she seemed to be in a good place. Unfortunately, another layer of chaos surfaced. Had my father been in the house, my sister's boyfriend would never have been living with us while she was in the 10th grade. I shared a room with her, and she had no mercy. She would have sex with him right there in the room, right there while I was in the twin bed next to hers. Maybe she thought I was asleep, but I knew enough to know, and I would feel so uncomfortable I would leave and finish sleeping in the living room. It was as if she had no scruples whatsoever or just didn't care. I thought that was something that was supposed to be private. My uncle, the very one who moved us from Richmond to Pomona, came for a visit one time and did not like what he saw. He told my mother the boy needed to go, and she listened and he left. One thing about men in a house, another man is not going to come in and do his thing. But that wasn't the only danger. A cousin was hanging around us too, the same cousin who had raped my little sister when we lived in Pomona around the 4th of July. She must have been terrified, but she didn't disclose what he had done until more than 20 years later. And on top of that, the sister right above me had a boyfriend who turned out to be a rapist as well. We were surrounded by threats we didn't have the language or power to name. The quitclaim letter. During the present separation, Nate sent Cora a letter, a quitclaim deed, asking her to sign away her rights to the house in Richmond. Cora went to the notary, quiet but determined. She had made up her mind, or so she thought. The notary, whom was a woman, looked her in the eye and asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes," my mother said. The notary went a little further with the prepping of the paperwork and then asked again, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" "Yes," Cora said, reassured. And once more, at the door, the notary stopped her, voice firm, eyes steady. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" That time, something in my mother's spirit caught the message. It was like the woman's voice reached a place inside her she didn't even know was listening. She held the signed deed in her hand, walked out the door, but she never mailed it. Somehow, she knew that woman was telling her, "Don't give away your home." It was chaotic. It was stressful. It was survival. But it was also the beginning of yet another chapter, one where my mother, once again, chose movement over misery and possibility over pain. I'm Riá Marlowe, and this is the story of Cora, the woman who walked out of Arkansas with nothing but endurance in her bones and a quiet strength that could steady a whole generation. Thank you for sitting with me. Subscribe to the Chronicles, and stay tuned for part 2 of this seemingly unbearable story. Remember, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to break.